You never really know who someone is until they don't get what they want. That's the lesson I learned the hard way when my ex-boyfriend Ryan refused to accept that our relationship was over. At first, Ryan seemed perfect. He was charming, attentive, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room when he looked at me. We met in college. He was a senior, I was a sophomore. And for the first 6 months, things were honestly great. He surprised me with coffee before classes. He remembered little things I said, and he went out of his way to make me feel special. But there were cracks I ignored. Ryan got jealous easily. If I was talking to a male classmate, even casually, he'd find a way to insert himself into the conversation, wrap his arm around me like a claim. He hated when I went out without him, and when I mentioned needing space, like studying alone, he'd sulk or guilt-trip me into changing my plans. By the end of that year, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. His love felt more like control. Breaking up with him wasn't easy. Ryan didn't yell, didn't beg. He just smiled this unsettling, tight-lipped smile and said, "Don't worry, I'll always be here for you." At the time, I thought it was just something people say, but I didn't realize he meant it literally. The first strange thing happened 2 weeks later. I came back from a late study session, walking up to my apartment building, when I noticed a small object propped against my door. It was a single Polaroid photo of me, taken from outside my window. I froze, my stomach dropping. The picture showed me sitting at my desk, studying. The blinds had been half closed, but clearly not enough. Someone had been outside my apartment in the dark watching me. I told myself it couldn't be Ryan. He didn't even live in the same complex. Maybe it was some kind of prank. Still, I shoved the photo in a drawer and double-checked my locks. The next morning, there was another Polaroid. This one was slid under my door. It showed me sleeping in bed. That's when I realized someone had been inside my apartment. I went to the leasing office in a panic. They told me there was no sign of forced entry, that maybe a roommate had left the door unlocked. I lived alone, so that wasn't true. When I asked if they could change the locks, they brushed me off and said I'd have to pay for it myself. That night, I slept with a knife under my pillow. The following week was quiet. I started to believe maybe it was just some sick prank, maybe even something unrelated to Ryan. But then, late one night around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of me, taken in real time. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, and the picture was from outside my bedroom window. My heart almost stopped. I scrambled out of bed, yanked the curtains shut, and dialed the police with shaking hands. By the time they arrived, whoever it was had disappeared. I showed them the messages, the photos. They asked if I suspected anyone. Ryan's name slipped out before I could stop myself. The officer gave me a sympathetic look but said without hard proof, there wasn't much they could do. "Block the number, stay somewhere safe if you can," was all they offered. I tried to convince myself it wasn't Ryan, but deep down, I knew. Ryan had this way of making promises sound like threats. When I told him I was done, he hadn't cried or argued. He just looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll miss me. You'll see." And now, I was starting to wonder if he'd been planning this all along. One evening, after class, I stopped by a small cafe to grab coffee before heading home. As I waited in line, I felt this strange sensation, like someone was watching me. When I glanced at the window, my heart nearly leapt into my throat. Across the street, standing half hidden behind a tree, was Ryan. He wasn't moving. He wasn't smiling. He was just staring at me with this cold, unblinking intensity. I froze. For a moment, I debated running out the back exit, but when I looked back at the tree, he was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of my apartment building made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was nearby, lurking, waiting. Then came the worst moment yet. I had just stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped around me, when I noticed something odd. My bathroom mirror was fogged up as usual, but there was writing across it. Not from me. Written in the condensation, in tall, deliberate letters, were the words, "Still mine." I dropped the towel and bolted out of the bathroom, my entire body trembling. He had been inside again, recently enough to write that message. I stood frozen in my apartment, heart pounding so loudly I swore whoever was in the building could hear it. The words on the bathroom mirror were starting to drip, the letters smearing as the condensation faded. But the message was still clear. Ryan had been here. I didn't even stop to change. I grabbed my phone, my purse, and ran barefoot down the hall, ignoring the neighbors who peeked out when they heard me bolt down the stairs. I drove to my best friend Mia's place across town and refused to go back to my apartment that night. When I told Mia everything, she didn't try to reassure me. It was worse than that. She hesitated, then admitted Ryan had stopped by her work earlier in the week, asking where I was. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. That confirmed it. This wasn't some random creep. This was my ex. The next morning I went back to the apartment with Mia. The lock wasn't broken, no windows shattered. Nothing out of place except for one tiny, chilling detail. On my nightstand, where I usually left a glass of water, was a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside, in Ryan's handwriting, were 3 words. "You look beautiful." My stomach dropped. The note wasn't old. It referenced the night before, when I had been fresh out of the shower. That meant he had been standing there just feet away from me while I was completely vulnerable. I contacted the police again. This time, I had physical evidence, the photos, the note, the texts. They finally agreed to open a formal case, but warned me it could take time. Unless Ryan made a direct threat or they caught him in the act, their hands were tied. It was maddening. I didn't want to wait until something worse happened, so I made a decision. I packed a bag and moved back in with my parents temporarily. They lived about 40 minutes away, in a quiet neighborhood. I figured Ryan wouldn't dare follow me there, but I underestimated him. The first 2 nights at my parents' house were peaceful. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. But on the 3rd night, around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was another text. No words this time, just a picture. It was my parents' house, taken from the backyard. I sat up, adrenaline surging, and tiptoed to the window. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, near the tree line, I spotted movement. A figure slipping back into the darkness. It was him. He had followed me here. That was the breaking point. My dad installed extra locks, motion sensor lights, even a couple of cameras. We gave the police everything. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but I knew Ryan was too smart for that. He was careful, calculated. Weeks dragged on, each day blurring together. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him across the street, or think I saw his car parked a few blocks down. The cops always seemed to arrive just a little too late. The worst part wasn't even the sightings, it was the feeling. The sense that no matter where I went, what I did, Ryan was always one step behind, watching, waiting. Then, one night in early spring, everything escalated. I woke to a sound downstairs, soft, deliberate, not like the house settling, more like footsteps. I froze, straining to listen. My parents' dog, usually quick to bark at strangers, whimpered instead. That was when I knew someone was inside. I grabbed the baseball bat my dad had left by my bed and crept to the top of the stairs. From the shadows below, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. "Who's there?" My dad's voice boomed suddenly from behind me. He had woken up too. In that instant, The breathing stopped. There was a loud crash, the back door slamming shut. We rushed downstairs, but by the time we got there, the yard was empty. The only sign he had been inside at all was the living room window. On the glass, pressed in condensation from the cold night air, was the imprint of a hand. The police increased patrols after that. My dad even stayed up some nights, waiting with the lights off, hoping to catch Ryan in the act. But Ryan never showed his face again. Not directly, anyway. Instead, the texts started again. Random times, random numbers. All with the same theme. You can't hide forever. Still thinking about you. Soon, it was relentless psychological warfare. I felt like I was losing my mind. Finally, my parents convinced me to file for a restraining order. It took weeks, but eventually the court approved it. Ryan was legally barred from contacting me or coming within 500 feet. For a while, things were quiet. I let myself believe maybe it was over. But one night, I opened my email and found a single message waiting for me. No subject line, no sender listed, just one sentence. Pieces of paper don't stop love. That was months ago. Since then, I haven't seen Ryan, haven't heard from him. Some people tell me I should move on, that he probably got bored, found someone else to obsess over. But I don't believe it, because some nights, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I hear footsteps outside my window, not close enough to see, just far enough to remind me he's still there, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, the obsession never really ended. If you've ever lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you know the comfort of routine. Lights flicking off one by one across the street, the faint hum of sprinklers in the distance, and the silence that settles when everyone finally goes to bed. For some, that silence is peace. For others, it's when the imagination runs wild. For Lily, it was both.
She had moved back into her childhood home after graduating college, living with her mom in a single-story house at the edge of town. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved, where the mailman knew your dog's name, and where the worst disturbance was usually a raccoon rummaging through trash cans. At least, that's what she thought. It was mid-July when it started. Nights were hot, and she often cracked her bedroom window open for air. The first time she noticed something was off, it was so small she almost ignored it, a faint tapping at her window. She told herself it was tree branches brushing against the glass, even though the nearest tree was several feet away. She shrugged it off. But then the tapping came again. Slow, deliberate. Not wind, not random. When she pulled the curtain back, she saw nothing but her reflection in the glass and the faint glow of the street lamp down the road. No movement, no shadow. She convinced herself it was just her nerves. A few nights later, though, the tapping came back. And this time she didn't check. Instead, she lay frozen in bed, listening. 3 taps. Silence. Then 3 more, evenly spaced, like someone testing to see if she was awake. Her heart thudded against her chest, and she told herself, it's just a bird. Or maybe the house settling. Nothing more. But then came the whisper. It was faint, muffled through the screen, but unmistakable. Her name. Lily. She sat up in bed so fast her head spun. She yanked the curtain back again. Nothing. Just the empty yard, illuminated by that distant orange streetlight. No figure, no movement, just stillness. The next morning, she told her mom about it. Her mom laughed it off, saying Lily had probably been half asleep, dreaming. Lily laughed too, pretending to agree. But she knew what she'd heard. Over the next week, small things began happening. Her bedroom window, which she swore she left shut, would sometimes be cracked open in the mornings. A lawn chair from their backyard kept appearing beneath her window. Her mom insisted she must have moved it while gardening, but Lily hadn't.
Then came the moment she couldn't deny. It was a Saturday night. Her mom had gone out to visit a friend, leaving Lily home alone. Around midnight, she was scrolling on her phone when she heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, she turned off her lamp and sat in the dark, staring at the window. Her eyes adjusted slowly, and then she saw it. A face, pressed against the glass, just inches from her own. A pale, gaunt face, framed by dark, greasy hair. The man's lips twisted into a grin as his breath fogged the glass. Lily's body locked in place, her mind screaming at her to move, but she couldn't. Finally, she bolted. She grabbed her phone, sprinted to the living room, and dialed 911. By the time police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the yard, the street, even the woods behind the house. Nothing. The officers suggested maybe it had been a prank, some kid from the neighborhood trying to scare her. But Lily knew. The man's face had been too close, too purposeful. And the way he whispered her name. That wasn't a prank. That was personal. Her mom installed new locks on the windows the next day, and Lily stopped opening them at night, even during the worst of the summer heat. For a week, everything was quiet again. She started to believe maybe it really had been some random creep passing through. Then, one night while lying in bed, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Not a tap, not a whisper, but the faint, unmistakable sound of her window sliding open. This time, she didn't wait to look. She grabbed her phone and crept into the hallway. Her mom's door was shut, light off. Lily whispered her name, but there was no response. That's when she heard the floorboard creak from inside her bedroom. Lily froze in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall. The sound of that creaking floorboard still echoed in her ears, and she knew it hadn't come from her imagination. Someone was inside her room. Her first instinct was to run straight out the front door, but her mom was still in the house somewhere. Heart pounding, she slowly reached for the baseball bat that leaned against the coat rack by the entryway. It had belonged to her dad before he passed, and suddenly, it was her only sense of protection. She whispered again, "Mom?" Silence. Then, footsteps. Soft, dragging steps, moving from her bedroom toward the hallway. Lily's breath hitched as she crouched low, gripping the bat with trembling hands. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush. They were moving slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every second of her fear. The hallway light switch was just inches away, but she didn't dare move. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. A shadow stretched along the wall. Someone was there. She darted toward her mom's room and shoved the door open. But the bed was empty, sheets messy, pillows tossed aside. Panic shot through her veins. Where was her mom? The dragging footsteps grew closer. Lily slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing her weight against it as the knob jiggled on the other side. Then, a voice, low, male, familiar, in the worst possible way. "Lily, I told you I'd come back for you." Her stomach dropped. She knew that voice. It was her ex-boyfriend, Aaron. The same Aaron she had broken up with 2 years ago after his obsession turned dangerous. The same Aaron who had slashed her tires, followed her to work, left threatening notes in her mailbox. The police had given him a warning back then, but not much else. And now he was inside her house. The door rattled violently as Aaron slammed his shoulder into it. Lily stumbled back, fumbling with her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. She whispered to the dispatcher, barely able to form words. "He's here. He broke in. Please, send someone." Before she could finish, the wood around the lock splintered. The door burst open. Aaron stood in the doorway, his face pale and twisted with rage, eyes gleaming with something far beyond obsession. He held a knife in one hand, the blade glinting under the faint light. Lily swung the bat with every ounce of strength she had. The crack of wood against his arm echoed through the room. He dropped the knife with a metallic clang, howling in pain. She didn't wait. She sprinted past him, bolting down the hallway toward the front door. He recovered quickly, snarling, and lunged after her, Her fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, slick with sweat, but at the last second, the lock clicked free. She yanked the door open and ran screaming into the street. A neighbor's porch light flicked on, then another. Dogs started barking, and finally, mercifully, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Aaron froze at the doorway, his twisted grin faltering as red and blue lights washed over the street. For a moment, Lily thought he might charge anyway, knife or no knife. But then, like a coward, he bolted into the darkness, vanishing between houses. The police surrounded the area within minutes, but Aaron was gone. They promised to track him down, but Lily knew better. Aaron wasn't finished. People like him never just disappeared. That night, Lily and her mom packed a bag and left the house behind, too shaken to ever sleep there again. And though weeks passed, and eventually Aaron was caught and arrested, Lily couldn't shake one memory. Not the tapping, not the whisper, not even the sight of his face pressed against her window. But the fact that for weeks, her mom had been telling her she was imagining things, that maybe she was dreaming, that maybe she was overreacting. And yet, someone had been moving that lawn chair under her window. Someone had been whispering her name. He had been planning, waiting, watching. And every night since, no matter where Lily goes, no matter how many locks she installs, she swears she still hears it sometimes. Soft and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap at her window. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of your front door unlocking, even though you live completely alone. That's exactly what happened to Emily. Emily was 24, a recent graduate who had just moved into her first apartment in a mid-sized city. It wasn't anything glamorous, just a small one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a brick building that had clearly been standing since the 70s. But to Emily it represented independence, adulthood, and a space to finally call her own. She had lived there for only a month when strange things began happening. At first, they were so small that she brushed them off. A picture frame on her nightstand slightly tilted. A kitchen drawer she was sure she'd closed left open when she came home from work. The bathroom light on when she swore she'd turned it off. She rationalized everything. Maybe she'd been clumsy. Maybe she was just forgetting. Moving was stressful, her mind was probably just scattered. But then came the noises at night. The first time it happened, she was lying in bed around 1 a.m. She had just set her phone down and was letting herself drift into sleep when she heard the unmistakable metallic click of her front doorknob. She froze. The knob jiggled once, then again. Slow, deliberate. Her heart pounded so hard she thought whoever was outside might hear it. She stayed completely still, clutching her blanket, eyes locked on the dark hallway that led to her door. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. No footsteps, no door creaking open, just silence. She eventually gathered the courage to creep out of bed and check through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Emily barely slept that night. The next morning, she called her mom, recounting everything. Her mom's response was gentle but dismissive. "Honey, you're in a new place. Buildings creak, doors expand and contract with temperature. You probably just imagined it." Emily wanted to believe her, but deep down she knew she hadn't. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, she heard not just the knob, but the distinct metal scrape of a key sliding into her lock. Her breath caught in her throat as the cylinder rotated. Whoever it was had a key. Her front door rattled once, twice, then silence. She sat upright in bed, too terrified to move. The thought of someone standing just outside her door, holding a key, waiting, was enough to send chills down her spine. The next morning, she went straight to her landlord. The building was old. Tenants had come and gone for decades. She told him what had happened and demanded the locks be changed. The landlord, a balding man in his 50s with coffee-stained teeth, just sighed. "Miss, no one else has keys to that unit. I gave you the only set." "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" Her insistence only earned a shrug. "I can change the lock if you want, but it'll cost you $75. Emily didn't have much money left after moving expenses, but she reluctantly agreed. Watching the handyman drill in a brand new deadbolt gave her a little peace of mind. For about a week, everything was quiet. She almost convinced herself it had all been in her head. Then, one Thursday night, she came home from work and found her living room window cracked open. Emily always kept it shut and locked. The only explanation was that someone had been inside. She called the police this time. 2 officers arrived, took a quick look around, and saw no signs of forced entry. They suggested she must have left it open by accident. One of them even gave a light chuckle, saying, "Apartments don't break into themselves, miss. You'll be fine." She felt humiliated, but her gut screamed that she wasn't fine. The real terror struck the following weekend. She was asleep again when she heard it, the slow, deliberate twist of her front doorknob. She sat up instantly, holding her breath. The knob turned fully this time. She heard the faintest squeak of the door beginning to open. Her fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. Whispering into the receiver, she said, "Someone's trying to get into my apartment. Please hurry." The dispatcher's calm voice assured her help was on the way. From her bedroom, Emily watched the shadow under her door grow darker. The front door was open. Someone was inside. She stifled a scream and backed into her closet, crouching low, trying to make herself invisible. Her phone pressed to her ear. She listened as the footsteps crept slowly across her living room. Heavy, measured, confident. She whispered into the phone, "He's in here. He's in my apartment." Every second felt like an hour. The footsteps stopped just outside her bedroom. The knob turned. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, heart hammering in her chest. And then, nothing. The sound of retreating footsteps. The faint click of the front door closing. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no signs of struggle. The officers exchanged skeptical glances as Emily tried to explain. It felt like no one believed her. But she knew the truth. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone with a key. And worst of all, she had no idea when they'd come back. The police left that night with little more than a warning to call again if it happens. Emily locked every window, double-checked the new deadbolt, and still couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. She barely slept, every creak of the building making her jolt awake. The next morning, she called her best friend, Jenna. If no one else believed her, at least Jenna would. "I swear, Em," Jenna said over the phone, "you're spiraling. You're living alone for the first time. Your brain is playing tricks on you. No one is breaking into your apartment." Emily's throat tightened. "I heard him. I saw the shadow under my door. Jenna, someone was in here." But Jenna, like everyone else, brushed it off. That weekend, Emily decided to set up a trap of her own. She balanced a glass against her front doorknob and taped a thin string of aluminum foil across the frame. If anyone came in while she was gone, they'd disturb it. When she returned from work Monday evening, the glass was on the floor. The foil string had been torn. Emily froze in her doorway, too terrified to step inside. After mustering her courage, she checked every room. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing was out of place. But she knew, without a doubt, someone had been there. Her hands shook as she called the police again. 2 different officers came this time, less patient than the first. They looked at the fallen glass and broken foil, unimpressed. "Miss, these traps aren't evidence," one said. "If you keep calling without proof, we're going to have to mark this as false reporting." They left her standing there, humiliated once again. That night, Emily lay in bed staring at her bedroom door, too scared to close her eyes. Around 3 a.m., she heard it. A soft shuffle of footsteps across her carpet. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard the front door. Had she fallen asleep and missed it? No. These footsteps were coming from inside. She turned her head slowly toward the corner of her room. In the faint glow from the streetlight outside, she swore she saw movement. A silhouette, tall and still, standing beside her dresser. Her scream tore through the silence. She flicked on her bedside lamp. Nothing. The corner was empty. Shaking, she ran through the apartment. Every closet, under every bed, even inside the bathroom cabinet. Empty. But the fear clung to her. The next day, she bought a cheap motion-activated camera and set it up facing her front door. If no one believed her, maybe this would be the proof. 2 nights later, she got her answer. At 2:47 a.m., the camera's sensor clicked on. The video showed her front door slowly opening. A man stepped inside. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was tall, gaunt, with greasy hair hanging over his eyes. His face was pale, almost sickly. He moved with confidence, like he knew exactly where everything was. He shut the door gently, then walked straight down the hall toward her bedroom. The clip ended there. Emily watched it over and over, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped her phone. It was real. Someone was breaking in. But the worst part? She recognized him. It was her ex-boyfriend, Mark. They dated briefly in college, but she broke things off when he became possessive and controlling. She hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. She thought he was out of her life. Apparently, she was wrong. Heart racing, she called Jenna again, sending her the clip. Jenna's voice dropped to a whisper. "Oh my God, Em. That's him. That's Mark." Emily called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, Mark was long gone. She showed them the footage. This time their skepticism shifted to mild concern. They promised to open a case, but warned her there wasn't much they could do unless he actually harmed her. Emily wasn't reassured. She packed a bag and stayed at Jenna's for the next few nights, but eventually Jenna convinced her to come back. "He won't try again now that the police are aware. You'll be fine." Reluctantly, Emily returned home. She double-bolted the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and kept the lights on, but fear kept her awake. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally won. She woke to the sound of her chair scraping across the floor. Her blood ran cold. The door was opening, despite the chair, despite the locks. Mark stepped into her bedroom. His eyes glinted in the lamplight, wide, unblinking, filled with something unhinged. In his hand, he held a kitchen knife. Emily screamed, scrambling for her phone. Mark lunged forward, grabbing her wrist, the knife inches from her face. She thrashed wildly, knocking over the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. In the chaos, she managed to slam her knee into his stomach and wrench free. She bolted out of the apartment, barefoot, sprinting down the hall, banging on neighbors' doors. Mark's footsteps thundered behind her. Finally, a neighbor yanked their door open, pulling her inside just as Mark rounded the corner. Startled by witnesses, he fled. The police arrested him the next morning at his own apartment. He had a master key he'd stolen months ago while working as a temp for the building's management office. For weeks, he'd been slipping into Emily's apartment, sometimes watching her sleep, sometimes just standing in the dark. Emily moved out immediately after. She never returned to that building again. Sarah had never been the type to scare easily. Growing up with 2 brothers in a noisy household, she had learned to hold her own, to laugh at horror movies, and to brush off things that went bump in the night. But after moving into her small 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of town, she began to feel something she had never truly felt before: vulnerability. The building itself was old, the kind that still carried the faint scent of smoke from a time when indoor cigarettes were normal. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbor's television or the rhythmic thud of footsteps above. But the rent was affordable and the location close enough to her job that she could walk. At first, she felt lucky to have found it. The trouble began about 3 months in. It was late one Tuesday night, rain spattering against her windows, when Sarah got up to double-check her locks before bed. She always did it, clicking the deadbolt, tugging the door handle twice just to make sure it held. That night was no different. Satisfied, she crawled into bed with her phone and drifted off to the low hum of rain. But the next morning, as she reached for the knob to leave for work, she froze. The deadbolt was no longer turned. It was resting in the open position, as though she had never locked it at all. Her first thought was that she was losing her mind, that maybe she had been too tired to lock it properly. But she remembered the feeling of turning it, the metallic click beneath her fingers. She brushed it off. Stress, maybe. A busy mind. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time she was certain, absolutely certain, that she had locked it. She had even said aloud, "Locked," after turning the deadbolt, as if speaking it into existence would make it real. And yet in the morning, it was undone. Unease began to take root. Sarah told herself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the old lock was loose. Maybe it slipped out of place on its own. She called her landlord, an older man named Mr. Harvey, and explained the situation. He listened with mild impatience and promised to take a look next week. But by the following weekend, the problem escalated. It was around midnight when she woke to the faintest creak. At first, she thought it was part of a dream. But when her eyes blinked open, she noticed something strange. The hallway light she always left on had gone dark. She got up slowly, heart pounding, and moved toward the front door. The chain she had installed herself was dangling, unhooked. The deadbolt turned back to unlocked. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and held it like a weapon as she scanned every corner of her apartment. No one, no sound, just her ragged breathing. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, she found something that made her blood turn cold. A Polaroid photo slipped under her door. It showed her bed, her sheets slightly rumpled, and her figure, clearly asleep, barely illuminated by the glow of her alarm clock. Sarah dropped it like it burned her. Her mind raced. Someone had been inside. Someone had stood right over her while she slept. Her first instinct was to call the police. 2 officers arrived, scanned the apartment, and asked the usual questions. But with no signs of forced entry and only a single photo as evidence, their tone softened into skepticism. Could it be a prank? A friend with a spare key? One officer suggested. "I don't have friends here," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "And no one has a spare." They filed a report, bagged the Polaroid, and left with a promise to keep an eye out. But Sarah knew the truth. She was alone in this. That night, she shoved her dresser against the door, checked her locks 10 times, and dragged her mattress into the living room. She sat awake, eyes wide, listening to every creak and hum of the building. Hours crawled by. At some point, exhaustion overcame her, and her eyes shut against her will. When she woke, the dresser had been pushed back into its original place. The deadbolt was perfectly undone, neat and mocking. On the coffee table, a second Polaroid waited. This one showed her, sleeping on the mattress in the living room. Sarah's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone dialing 911 again. This time, the officer's patience was thinner. They searched. They found nothing. They exchanged a look that made Sarah feel like she was the problem, like she was making it up. But she knew she wasn't. She felt it. Every second of silence in that apartment pressed in on her. Someone had access. Someone was playing with her. And worst of all, they weren't finished. Sarah couldn't stay in that apartment another night. After the second photo appeared, she packed a bag, booked a cheap motel across town, and left before the sun went down. But even there, the paranoia followed her. Every knock on a neighbor's door, every footstep in the hall, every flicker of the motel's buzzing neon sign outside her window. It all felt like him. The faceless person who had been inside her apartment, who had taken photos while she slept. She lasted 3 nights at the motel before the money started draining too quickly. She called her landlord, demanding he change the locks immediately. He sighed through the phone, muttering about tenant responsibility and service charges, but she didn't care. She authorized the payment and returned to the apartment the next day to oversee it. The locksmith replaced both the deadbolt and knob, installing newer, sturdier models. Sarah watched closely, asking 100 questions. Could anyone pick these? Could they slip? Could they unlock themselves? The man gave her a half smile. Trust me, miss. These aren't going anywhere unless you unlock them yourself. That night, for the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. She cooked dinner. She put on music. She even scrolled through her phone without checking the door every 2 minutes. By midnight, she had convinced herself it was over. Whoever had been tormenting her had lost their access. They couldn't get in anymore. The locks were her shield. And then, at 3:17 a.m., she woke to a sound that froze her blood. The unmistakable metallic click of a deadbolt turning. Sarah bolted upright, her chest constricting. She stared at the door across the living room, waiting, begging her ears to be wrong. But slowly, deliberately, the knob turned as well. Someone was inside. She scrambled off the bed, heart hammering so loudly she thought it might give her away. She grabbed her phone, but before she could dial, the door eased open. A figure stepped in. He wasn't tall, but the sight of him made her stomach churn. He wore a dark hoodie pulled tight, face half in shadow. In one hand, dangling casually, was a small camera. Sarah stumbled backward, her scream catching in her throat. "Get out! Get out of my apartment!" The man didn't move. He just tilted his head, almost curious, like an animal studying prey. Then, in a low, calm voice, he said something that made her knees buckle. "Why'd you change the locks?" "I liked the old ones." Her hand finally worked, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. As soon as she pressed call, the man's calm shifted into something sharper. He lunged. Sarah threw the phone at his face and darted for the kitchen. She yanked open a drawer, grabbed the largest knife she could, and held it out with shaking hands. "Don't come any closer!" she screamed. The man froze. He smiled faintly, teeth catching in the dim light. "You look better awake," he murmured. Then, without warning, he turned and bolted out the door. Sarah's knees gave out the moment he disappeared. She stayed on the floor, sobbing, clutching the knife until the police arrived. But just like before, they were too late. The man was gone. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints. Just Sarah's word and her terror. The police tried to reassure her, but their voices were distant, meaningless. She realized the truth. This wasn't random. This wasn't a stranger who stumbled onto her apartment. He had been watching her. The next day, Sarah took off work and sat in a cafe for hours, staring out the window thinking, how had he gotten in? She had watched the locks replaced herself. The locksmith had sworn it was impossible. Unless... Her stomach dropped. Unless it wasn't the locks. Unless he already had a way in that she didn't know about. She returned to the apartment with fresh eyes, scanning every corner. She checked closets, cabinets, even the ceiling vents. Finally, while inspecting the bedroom closet, she noticed something she had overlooked. A section of the drywall near the back was slightly warped, almost like it had been moved. Her trembling fingers pulled it aside, and there it was, a narrow crawl space. Inside, food wrappers, an old blanket, and dozens of Polaroid photos. Photos of her cooking, watching TV, sleeping, changing. Her vision blurred. She staggered backward, bile rising in her throat. He had been living inside her walls. Sarah didn't stop to think. She ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the street. She didn't care that she was barefoot. She didn't care about the stairs. She called the police again, this time with proof they couldn't ignore. They combed through the crawl space, finding more evidence of his hidden life. But the man himself, gone, vanished. Sarah moved out that week. She didn't take much, just clothes, documents, and her laptop. Everything else she left behind. Months later, in a new city, she still wakes at 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, certain she'll hear that lock clicking open. She still checks every closet, every vent, every wall for hidden spaces. But the worst part, sometimes in the morning, she swears her new apartment's deadbolt is turned the wrong way.